Rob here at etrailer.com, and today you're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar on our 2012 Tiffin Allegro Motorhome. Now, we get a lot of questions here at etrailer.com about motorhomes, especially about how to make them drive better. Because once you start driving one, you'll realize real quick, they're pretty top heavy, they got a lot of area for the wind to catch, and if you're not very comfortable driving one, it can be very nerve-wracking. There's a lot of situations where the wind will start pushing us, there'll be dips in the road, and the motorhome doesn't react that quickly, so we end up getting a lot of body roll, fight that steering wheel, and then we're exhausted by the time we get where we're going. Well, the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar is going to help alleviate a lot of that mushy feeling. It's going to help that body roll side to side, whether we're taking a turn, we hit a bump in the road, or anything like that. It's going to help reduce that swaying in the back. And especially if we have a bathroom, bedroom, or if we have a car hooked up to the back that we're flat towing, that's a lot of extra weight that's going to be transferred side to side. And that's where that anti-sway bar is going to help with that rolling body feeling that we get. But before we put it in place, let's take it on our test course and see how the motorhome handles. As I take my motorhome on the test course, even over the bumps, I can feel the swaying feeling going back and forth. Especially on the alternating speed bumps, we'll hit one side, it wants to lean, bounce back, and it just continues to roll side to side. Really makes me want to slow down and have a firm grip on the steering wheel. And as I come into the slalom course, same thing's happening. I go to turn, it doesn't want to react quite as quickly as I'd like, so I end up slowing down, getting a firm grip on the steering wheel, and just a little bit nervous going in and out of the course. Now that everything's in place, let's take our motorhome back out on the test course and see how the handling improved. Going over the bumps, it's definitely reacting quicker. The alternating speed bumps are still there, but it's not this horrible, scary feeling where I'm feeling like I'm going to start swaying back and forth. It does lean a little bit, but then it just comes back straight, and it's not leaning as much. Now as I come up to the slalom course, I can already tell a difference. The ride is a lot smoother. As I'm going in and out of the turns, it reacts a lot more quickly. Now, it's still a really top-heavy, big vehicle, so there still is some body sway, but it's a lot more manageable and it reacts a lot quicker. I don't have so much of a leaning feeling. It just genuinely turns when I tell it to turn, and I can start to go through the turns a little bit faster as well. Our Roadmaster Anti-Sway Bar is going to help reduce the amount of body roll and swaying feeling we have whenever we're going around a turn or just driving our motorhome. And it's going to do that because it's going to connect directly to the axle here, and also to the frame, so whenever we turn, it's going to use the axle's leverage to keep everything in place. So even if we're going around a turn and one side wants to squat down, the bar is going to use that as leverage to keep everything nice and straight. If we look in front of the axle, you'll see we still have our factory sway bar. And that's because our new Roadmaster sway bar is meant to supplement our factory one and help support it and reduce the amount of sway that much more. It's not meant to replace it. Now, our rear sway bar is going to give us a really solid place in the rear end of our motorhome. However, if you want full sway control, I would suggest getting the front sway bar as well. That way our whole motorhome will be supported and we won't have that rolling feeling. Now, Roadmaster constructed our sway bar out of 4140 Chromoly steel, so we know it's going to be nice and strong. And they've also included polyurethane bushings instead of rubber ones, so they're going to withstand a lot more stress, and we don't have to worry about them deteriorating over time. And the bar is going to be 1 5/8 inches in diameter, so it's a pretty large bar. Now, it's going to come with everything we need to get it installed, all the hardware, the bar, brackets, and everything else. And one of the best things about it is that once we have it installed, we're not going to have to worry about anything. There's no maintenance involved with it, and we can install this while still leaving all tires on the ground. So now that we've seen what it looks like and gone over some of the features, let's put it on together. To begin our installation, we want to park our motorhome on a nice flat level surface, and we need to lift up the back end, but we can leave the tires on the ground. We just want a little bit of room for the suspension to flex, because if we move into the wheel well area here and look at the frame, I'll show you exactly why. Directly behind the rear tire, we're going to have these 4 bolts, and that's going to be holding our cross member in place. But we need to remove the 2 lower bolts on each side, so you want to grab a long extension and a 21mm socket, and we can pull these out. Once we have both of them loose, we want to pull both the bolts out, and you want to go into the inside of the frame because there's actually 2 keeper nuts that are back there. We don't have to hold a wrench to take the bolts out, but they are going to fall either on the inside of the frame or on the ground. Once you have your hardware out, you want to hold on to it because we are going to be reusing it. And this is what those keeper nuts look like. Once we get everything loosened up, the nut will actually spin, catch the frame, and allow the bolt to come all the way out. So now that we have this side pulled out, we're going to pull out the other side as well. At this point, we can grab our frame bracket. It'll have two tabs with holes going through them coming off the bottom. And then on the side here, we're going to have two holes. You just want to lift up the bracket, line it up with the holes in the frame, pass our bolts through. That'll temporarily hold the bracket up, and then we'll put our keeper nuts on the back side of the frame. Then we'll come back with that same 21mm socket and tighten up the bolts. And we're going to install the bracket on the other side of our RV the exact same way. At this point, we're going to move underneath our motorhome right at the rear axle. Now, at the rear axle, we're going to find our U-bolts that are attaching our leaf spring to the axle, and we need to remove those nuts so we can put this plate on. But when you do this, you want to do one side at a time, and you're also going to notice that my tires are still on the ground, because as soon as we loosen these U-bolts up, there's nothing else holding the axle up. That's why we want to make sure it's on the ground and it's not going to fall down. But you need a 1 1/8 inch socket, and I will let you know these are extremely tight, so you either need to get a big breaker bar or have an impact wrench to loosen these up. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to remove the remaining 3, but I'm going to leave one extremely loose at the very end, because this plate down here, it will start to come down as we loosen the nuts, and it's extremely heavy, so I'm going to leave one bolt or one nut just loosely on there. Now that we have the U-bolts loose and we have that one nut just in case that plate decides to drop, we can look at our lower bracket here. Now you're going to notice that there is 4 holes. 2 of them are going to be slotted, but then we're going to have smaller holes and it kind of tapers out. We want to make sure that these 4 holes are towards the center and they're facing towards the back of the motorhome. So when we put it in place, our plate should look like this. So I'm going to remove that last nut, slide my bracket into position, and then for now I'm just going to put at least one nut very loosely in place so I can get the rest of my hardware in, because both of these plates are rather heavy. So if you can, just like I said, get one started and then we can start putting the hardware back in place. So make sure you put the washers and nuts back in and reuse all the factory hardware. And with all the hardware back in place, we're going to come back with that 1 1/8 socket and we're going to tighten all these up. Now you do want to alternate again, going back and forth and between the front and the back, so that the U-bolt will clamp down evenly and it'll draw everything up nice. And with this bracket installed, we're going to repeat that entire process on the other side of our motorhome. Now that both sides of the frame plates are in underneath our leaf springs, I went ahead and lowered the back end of my motorhome down. That way, if we look at our frame bracket that we initially installed, the tabs are now going to be below our leaf spring, because we're actually going to have to put a bolt through here, and if we left it lifted up, the leaf spring's actually blocking the hole and we're not going to get any hardware in. I want to grab our shackles now. We'll have one end that's going to have a bushing and an eyelet through it, and then the other end is going to be open with 2 holes. Take the end with the bushing, we're going to slide it in between the bracket that's on the frame, and we're going to grab one of the large 5/8 bolts. We'll pass it through the bracket, make sure it goes all the way through the bushing and comes out the other side. Then we'll take the 5/8 nylon lock nut, and I'm just going to put this on there hand tight for now, so I know the bolt's not going to come out, but we don't have to worry about tightening it up just yet. You want to do this for both sides. At this point, we're going to bring our sway bar underneath our motorhome. Now if we're looking at it, in the center here, there should be a dip that's going down, and the 2 arms on the side should be facing towards the back. Now you'll notice that on the side here, we're going to have the same type of bushings that we had on the Shackles. We want to lift our sway bar up to where it's going to be in between the shackle that we mounted. We'll slide it up. Once we get everything lined up, we want to grab another one of the long bolts out of our kit, just like we used one for the Shackles. We're going to go through the bracket, through our sway bar, And then we're going to put another nylon lock nut on the outside. And for now, we just want to make sure that nylon lock nut is on there at least hand tight. You can always come back and tighten everything up at the end. But we'll put our bolt and our sway bar in place on the other side as well. Now that we have our sway bar hanging, we're going to need to put our bushings in. We'll grab the lubrication out of our kit. And you want to wear gloves because this does get pretty messy. But we'll stick a good amount. And we'll open up our bushing. They're split bushings, so we'll just spread it apart. We're going to take our lubrication. We want to put a nice thick coating on the inside of that bushing where it's going to be nice and covered. The lube is actually going to prevent any kind of squeaking and noises when we're driving down the road from any moisture getting inside that bushing. We'll coat the inside, open up our bushing, wrap it around the bar. Then we can take our clamp, and this is going to slide right over the bushing and sit in place just like that. And we're going to have another bushing and clamp that's going to go on the other side, and it's going to be really close to this curve here. Now that both bushings and clamps are in place, we're going to rotate our sway bar up to where it's going to meet up with that plate we put on the bottom of the U-bolts. Now from the top going down, we're going to take a bolt and a flat washer, and we want to drop it down through this first hole in our bracket. And we'll rotate our clamps in place to where they line up. We're going to use another flat washer and a nut to secure everything. Now you want to get at least one on each side, so it would help if you have an extra set of hands. But we'll rotate it up, line it up to where the bolts in our bracket line up. Then we can loosely put some hardware in, so we don't have to worry about the sway bar falling down. And then we can get the rest of the hardware in place. Now each one of our brackets is going to have 2 bolts, so we'll just put the other one in on the other side and on the other side of our motorhome. I'm going to grab an 11/16 socket and wrench, and I'm going to tighten up the bolts that are holding my clamps in place. For the larger bolts that are going through our shackle and attaching up at the frame, I'm going to be using a 15/16 socket and wrench to tighten those up. One thing I do want to mention when you're tightening this up, you don't want to tighten it too much where it actually crushes that bushing. You just want that bolt to tighten up and to where they're just going to make contact with that bushing. And then we'll go back and we're going to repeat that for all the other hardware that we have. We're going to come back, double check your instructions, and we're going to torque all of our hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. But that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar on our 2012 Tiffin Allegro Motorhome.